All right. I'm making this video because my friends who I play in the space with said one of the more difficult aspects of the game that they were finding is navigating the technology screen. So I was going to address it quickly, break down this video into three parts. The first part is going over the interface of the text screen, how to read it, basically teaching the alphabet that's used in it. The second would be how to actually interact with the text screen, how you select your text and what that means. So, teaching how to write with that alphabet. And then the third and final thing, and probably the most important, is a quick overview of what I think is important about the individual technologies. I won't go over every single technology. I'll mostly focus on the ones that I tend to avoid, the ones that I think are really good, specifically in the beginning part of the game where your choices matter most because they'll ripple on throughout the rest of the game. So basically teaching you the value of each letter in the alphabet. If it's a vowel, if it's used a lot, if it's a Y, X, or Z, and you can almost never see it. Uh, and yes, the alphabet metaphor was necessary. So the first thing, how to actually read and understand the tech tree. It's broken into four quadrants. You have the north quadrant, east, south, and west, up, down, left, right, however you want to identify it. Um, and each quadrant contains certain types of technologies. The north quadrant is the military quadrant. That one's relatively self explanatory. You will find stuff in here that makes it easier to kill people. The right or east quadrant is the economy and trade quadrant. You'll find dust and industry related technologies over here. In the bottom quadrant, science and exploration, you will find technologies that help you do science related stuff, finding curiosities, colonizing planets, increasing your science score. And the left and final quadrant is the empire development. This is where you're going to find food technologies and influence technologies, as well as technologies that allow you to interact with other factions, things that allow you to do alliances and whatnot. Each quadrant is then further broken down into 5 rings. You have your first ring, your second ring, third ring, fourth ring, and fifth ring. As you can see, I can research text in this first ring, but not in this second ring. It's grayed out, and it doesn't have this blue band where the 2 or 3 or so on is. That's because you have to unlock text earlier on in a quadrant to get access to additional rings. So the way you know how to do that is these little symbols here, these locked boxes. These show you how many techs in this ring you have to research to get access to the next one. So to get to ring 2, I have to research one tech in ring 1. To get to ring 3, I have to research 2 techs in ring 2, so on and so forth. And you can see those are demonstrated in other areas, and they're not the same. You can see it takes 4 to get to this final one here in this quadrant, but only 3 to get to ring 5 in the right quadrant. So it's not always the same, and it is quadrant exclusive. Researching, you know, uh, one tech over here in Empire Development isn't going to count as my one military tech to get into Ring 2. So the shorthand version of that is researching techs in a quadrant allows you to get more techs in that quadrant. Additionally, on those bands where the rings are, you'll see sometimes little symbols next to the ring number. There can be a lot, as you see in the military quadrant, there are usually tons. And there could be next to none, and I think even some have none. Doesn't look like it. Okay, so they range from a little bit to a lot. These are free technologies that you get when you get access to that ring. So if I research one of these two techs, I'll unlock ring two, and simply by unlocking ring two, I get access to this laser, to this shield, to this war camps, to this upgrade and command points, and more weapons and shielding over here. I get all of these techs for quote unquote free just by unlocking this ring. And these can be really important. Like, for example, over here, these free techs are incredibly valuable, but we won't get into that just yet. Additionally, when you look at a tech, so the tech you research is this black looking orb that kind of highlights when you go over it. You left click it to put it in your research queue. Um, each tech takes a certain amount of science. You can see this one takes 66. This one takes 105. The further into a ring you go, the more science it's going to take. This one takes all the way up to 1,000 to research it. Additionally, the cost of every tech in the tree goes up for every tech you've learned. And what that means is the more technologies you've researched, the more expensive technologies become. So if you start picking up a bunch of technologies that you're not ever going to use, or you're going to use later but can't use immediately, you're going to make navigating the technology tree harder for yourself, or more expensive at least. And then last thing is the little floating bubbles next to the primary tech are a shorthand way of showing you what is included in that technology. Um, Two things of note are the image itself inside the bubble, and then the color of the bubble or the circle itself. The color denotes the type of technology it is. So red denotes that it's a military related technology. Green denotes that it gives you food. Purple denotes that it gives you influence. Pink is happiness or approval. Blue is science related or planetary colonization related. Um, Orange or brown is going to be your industry and resources, and yellow is going to be dust or money. Um, and then the icons within the circles or bubbles themselves denote what that technology gives as well. So you see these little buildings. These are system improvements, which you can see um, on the bottom left, just below the name. It says impervious bunkers, and then it says system improvement. So system improvements are things you build in your systems, in your solar systems where you have planets. Uh, those are structures that will improve them. These multiple layered squares are going to be modules. These are going to be things you put on ships. Um, there's also, I want to show you, yeah, so there's the building, but it's got like a little wreath next to it, half of a laurel. Those are unique improvements. They are a one-time build. So you can build the Denark University, but you can only build it once, as compared to this other system improvement, not a unique improvement, that you can build in every single system you own. The full wraiths or laurels or wings, whatever you want to call them, are empire improvements, and these are nice because they are applied automatically. When I get this applied happiness program, I don't have to build it anywhere. I don't have to do anything with it. Just automatically, all of my planets will always have this buff on them. The flags are planetary techs. You need these to be able to colonize certain planets. Um, these little connected boxes, both the red one and the blue ones, are for hacking if you have the Penumbra expansion. So the red ones are for offensively hacking other people, and the blue ones are for um, either defensive hacking, like this one, or they give you more hacking speed and more hacks available to you. The planet looking ones, these are planetary specializations. These are basically system improvements that go on individual planets. So rather than affecting the whole entire system, they'll affect the singular planet that you build them on. And there are other little ones. but I don't want to go into every single picture because it's not important. These ones with the little ship icons give you hulls. Hulls are more ship possibilities, stronger ships, bigger ships, carriers, etc. So those are ships. Um, and I guess it's worth mentioning that, even though military is primarily in the northern quadrant, and another example is unlocking new planetary colonizations is primarily in the southern quadrant, technologies aren't always exclusive to the tree you think they would be in, which seems like it could be a little confusing, but it's usually limited to the examples of planetary colonizations and ships. Um, you can see there's a couple colonizations for planets on the right and on the left, and then the ship hulls are not in military. I think this is simply to balance if someone is going really hard into military and trying to attack other players or AI, that you need to at least dip your toes into a different tree to work your way around um, stuff. So let's see here. Oh, and these blue lines, if you have a preceding tech, you get a discount in science to research the following tech. So if I had these rare earth foams already researched, and then later I tried to research these PEF scale accelerators, I would get a small uh, bonus in order to research it. It would be less expensive than, say, I just tried to research it without the rare earth foams researched already. And you can see there's not a lot of blue lines connecting different things. It's not super relevant, but if you can optimize a little bit to include it, that's great. And I think the very last thing you need to know to read the technology screen are these large diamonds in the middle of the different rings. Um, these are quests. They are going to be the same for every player. You have to unlock them to have access to them. Uh, so, for example, I have Ring 2 unlocked uh, here, which means that I have the Ring 2 quest unlocked. And we hover over it and we can see what it wants us to do. Be the first to possess 20 star system improvements in your empire, and that's our reward. The first person to do that gets it, and then the quest turns off for everybody. So it's first come, first serve. Now, let's say hypothetically this next quest was like, I don't know, get 1,000 dust, have 1,000 money in your pocket. Um, and I complete that, but I don't have Ring 3 unlocked, then I can't actually get whatever this reward is until I've actually unlocked Ring 3. So if the quest is grayed out, then that means you can't do it. I've played games where, you know, I'll have a friend complete a quest and it'll tell everybody that they completed that quest, and one of my other friends will think, well, what the hell? I did that like 10 turns ago. Why didn't I get that reward? Well, they didn't get far enough into the tech tree where that quest was. Um, okay, I think that's it for the icons and how to read this. Uh, there's super late game stuff up here. You can see that there's 4 special techs um, that are kind of combined into 2 quadrants, and you need 3 of the Ring 5 techs from either side to get it. If you research all 4 of those techs, you get a science victory. It's one of the winning conditions of the game. But you should be able to read the tech tree with everything I've told you up to this point. So the second step is how to interact with it, which is fairly simple. I use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out, and when you're zoomed in, you can left click to drag around and move around and manipulate the technology screen. Left clicking will add a technology to the research queue. You can queue multiple techs up. Try not to do that though. Queuing a bunch of technologies, and for that matter, buildings in your systems, um, it'll it seems like a good thing to do when you first start playing the game, but things change quickly, and what's the simplest way I can describe it? You might need to pivot, and when you have multiple things queued up, your resources get automatically dumped into the next thing that's queued up. So I highly recommend to avoid that and to be able to make good decisions every so often when your technologies or buildings are done. Don't queue up a bunch of stuff, at least in the early game, like the first 30 to 40 turns. Try to do it one at a time and think about what it is you want to do at that moment and what will benefit you most. And late game, when you're able to build a bunch of stuff all at once and do a bunch of technologies all at once, and you're feeling kind of lazy and you've got a bunch of other stuff to worry about, go ahead and queue up a bunch of stuff. But I highly recommend not doing that in the early game. It's only going to hurt you. Um, Left clicking in the research queue will drop the text that you have queued up there, and then you can also left click and hold and drag them around. You can also, I think it's hold Alt and left click. Yeah, and it'll just pop it in the front. So you can see if I just left click it, it puts it in the back. If I left click and hold Alt, it'll pop it into the front. And that also works for your system improvements. Anything you can queue stuff up in, that should work. Um, okay, and then you can display the research key here, and it'll tell you basically the stuff I've already gone through here in more detail. I have it turned off because I think it's just a lot of clutter and I don't need it. But if you need it, that's fine. You can see your science per turn up here. And that's pretty much it on how you actually interact with the text screen as far as I can think. Um, One little closing note is your science can build up. I believe you can hold up to 2 turns of science production. So if I'm making 22 science a turn, I could skip this turn and it would say I had 22 science stored, and I could skip my next turn and it would say I have 44 science stored. But you can't store any more than that. So at that point, you're just going to be losing out. So there are times in which, you're like, well, I really want this tech, but I can't get it for whatever reason. I need another turn. You don't have to be, you're not going to lose out on science if you don't research something for at least a turn. So you can store that science up if you wanted to. Um, and any additional science that spills over, so let's say this tech takes 66 science to complete. For the sake of math, let's say that it only takes 60. So it would be 3 turns at 22 science per turn, and I would have 6 extra science. If I had 2 things queued up, that 6 extra science would immediately go into this rare earth foams. Um, but as I talked about earlier and just explained, you can store science, so don't feel the need to queue multiple things up. You're not going to be losing science. It'll just get stored up and it'll get put into the next thing you click. So it's better to do things one at a time. And then the third and final bit, uh, breaking down the technologies. This is probably the part that people actually needed help with. Um, and it is the most complicated part, and it is the most dynamic part. It'll change contextually depending on what race you're playing, depending on what map you're on, what's around you. So everything I'm about to say is pretty broad stroke. You're still going to have to think, this isn't going to be a step by step, always get these texts in this order. This is going to just be me jump starting your own thinking process on how to choose checks for yourself, given whatever situation you're in. Now, there are technologies that are irrefugably better than other technologies. Um, Debatably, one of the best technologies in the game is this xenolinguistics. So before I get into any more detail about any technologies, the big disclaimer for Endless Space 2 in general is industry is king. It doesn't matter what your faction is designed to do. If you're playing the Lumeris and you want a lot of dust and you got to be buying stuff. If you're playing the United Empire, who I have selected right now, uh, and you're about influence, and you can buy your techs out and your buildings out with influence, and so you're like, oh, I want a bunch of influence so I can do my cool stuff. Absolutely work towards that, but industry is your foundation, and if you don't have enough industry, your foundation will be garbage, and you will find everything else harder to do and slower. So no matter what it is you care about, if you're the Sophons and you want to research a bunch of technologies, if you're the Cravers and you want to build a bunch of ships and go military, you need a strong foundation, which comes in the form of industry. Until you have that, you can't do much. The player who spends time building up industry might be farther behind by a small margin than another player doing whatever their goal is immediately, but very quickly that player who spent time on their industry and their infrastructure will skyrocket past that other player, and the other player will never be able to catch up. So industry is important, is is really all you need to take away from that. So xenolinguistics, first of all, it gives you access to titanium, which is nice. Titanium and Hyperium are very valuable early on. The sooner you can get them, the better. But the real winner here is this xeno-industrial infrastructure building it gives you. Tons of industry, especially depending on what type of planets you have. This will change depending on what faction you're playing, but this will always, always, always be a valuable building. It'll just be more valuable sometimes than others. For example, as the United Empire, if we look at my home system that you start the game with every time, it is a Terran planet that is both temperate and fertile, which means if I build xeno-industrial infrastructure, I will get plus 30 industry from one planet, which practically doubles my industry. Now, if you don't play a lot of Endless Space 2, you don't really have like a frame of reference. Like, okay, plus 30 industry, is that good? It's very good. It's super good. If you're playing United Empire specifically, and this isn't the first building you're making, you're doing something suboptimal. I'm not gonna say wrong. You play the game however you want. Okay, so for the exact same reasons that tech is good for that building, there is a mirror tech in our science section very early on, public-private partnerships, which does the exact same thing but for science. And science, is also very important. Being able to move through the technology tree, being able to get the techs you want. Um, so highly, highly, highly recommend this technology early as well. Even more so if you again have fertile or temperate planets available to you, if that's something the faction you're playing around cares for, and also if it's something that you just happen to be spawned with. Um, so those techs are like must grabs always. Other things early on, uh, Hyperium is good. Don't grab a tech like this if you don't have access to the resources it would allow you to get. First of all, these per person, uh, so for example, this one here, you get industry per person. That's what the little guy is, the population unit on your planets, and you get even more if there's strategic deposits there. If you have one or two people on your planet, then this isn't worth it. Usually these per population techs are better once you've actually filled out your systems with some population. So think twice before you get techs like these. They're usually good techs, but just make sure that you can get enough value out of them. And then make sure that you can also actually use the resource capture. If you have a planet that gives Hyperium, okay, you probably want to grab this because the sooner you can start amassing strategic techs, the better, or resources, the better. But if you don't have access to Hyperium and it's early in the game where this per person bonus is going to be negligible, then probably go find a different tech. And let's actually just do this quadrant by quadrant. So in the East Quadrant, economy and trade, talked about this tech's great. We talked about why you want to make sure you have access to resources and why you might want to wait on per pop stuff. These two techs, however, are a must every game. I don't know how early you might want to get them. I usually get them fairly early, but they are incredibly important techs. This one, multi-thread management specifically, because it allows you to buy out stuff. Um, it allows you to buy out improvements. It allows you to buy out ships, which basically just means that you get to complete them in one turn. You don't actually have to put industry in them. So it basically turns your dust into industry, which is really nice. And then sometimes there are things you can build that are turn based rather than industry based. And you might want to be buying out other things while you do that, because it doesn't matter if you have 1 or 10,000 industry. If you're doing a by turn based building, it's going to take that amount of time to build it. So this is a very nice tech to have. And then its sister tech, this Galactic Commodities, comes with G Goods Exchange. This allows you access to the marketplace, which you find in your economy screen. I can't get it right now because I don't have the tech. The marketplace allows you to sell and buy both luxury resources and strategic resources. Um, it's great. It gives you a ton of access to cash by selling stuff, um, and which allows you to buy things out if you have the other tech. Uh, it allows you to buy, if you just need like 2 extra titanium or whatever it is, then you can probably get it from the store, and you don't necessarily have to trade another player. There is an upgraded version of this marketplace that allows you to get access to heroes and mercenaries. I think this tech is good. I rarely get it personally. It depends on what faction I'm playing. I'll sometimes get it. Buying heroes can be pretty strong. I never buy ships from it. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. I don't know. But I'll only ever get this tech if I want to buy a bunch of heroes, and you have to have the infrastructure for that. So I don't usually get that one. Any technology that gives you access towards the strategic resources, um, so adamantium, antimatter, and then your late game ones, or a Cal 6 and quadrinks. Those are great. Additionally, this adamantium one is extra good because, again, we care about our infrastructure. Our industry is important, and predictive logistics is very good. It gives you 20 industry per planet. So once you have large systems with 4 or 5 planets and you actually have them colonized, this is going to give you a huge bump in industry. Just make sure you've got, systems with several planets before you build it. Otherwise, you know, it's not going to be super worth it. I think I'm just going to kind of go up to ring 4. I don't want to talk too much about all these. Some other good ones. I really like this Chameleon Spaces. Eventually, you will run out of stuff to build in some of your systems. Once you have enough industry, depending on what faction you're playing and how long the game has gone on, you'll need to turn that industry into something. I love turning it into science, personally. The exchange rate is garbage, but it's better than doing nothing with it at all. Uh, and then this tech here, the commercial frameworks, allows you to build trading companies. I don't particularly care for trading companies much, but there are a few instances in which I build them and they can generate a lot of money. It's a very nuanced system that I don't understand very well. Uh, I usually build it if I'm playing Umbral Choir because theirs is really good. Or if I have a hero like the one the United Empire starts with, a counselor hero, because they have this ability here that gives them extra influence if you have a trading company on the Empire. And I find the extra influence really valuable. So I almost don't even care about the dust. And that's just an example of how things in the game might affect your decisions in the tech tree. I almost exclusively get this when I play United Empire because I want the extra influence. Um, yeah, I think that's all we need to talk about in this tree. You can get an upgraded version of the science later, which is really good. But we're focused on like the first 30 turns of the game for our tech choices, and the first 30 turns of the game, you're not going to break past this third ring. Um, South quadrant, anything that gives planetary colonizations is good. Just make sure that if you're picking it up, you can use it. Um, Also, sorry, I paused because I remembered there is one other really important thing I forgot to mention. Um, Depending on what faction you're playing, the tech tree can change. So, for example, I'm playing the United Empire, and you see there are techs that have this symbol on it. It means that something about this tech is different because I am playing this faction. Uh, Keep that in mind when you are looking at techs. Usually, these techs are ones your empire cares about. Um, yes. Okay. Anyways, most factions will have some version of this applied happiness program, which I think is pretty good. This accelerator, I think, is one of the best offensive hacking uh, programs, so that's really good to get. One of the absolute earliest techs I get in this tree is almost always machine bacteria. Getting these upgraded probes so that you can see farther and get curiosities more quickly is incredibly valuable. Just make sure that you don't get this tech before you have access to the resources. You can see that this one costs titanium and this one costs hyperium, so make sure you sequence correctly. But I find this tech incredibly valuable. Um, Also, getting access to more curiosities. Curiosities are great. They give you resources, they give you luxury goods, they give you influence, they give you modules, weapons, buildings. Uh, Doing curiosities is a great thing. So anything that gives you access to more curiosities is also good. And then this tech here allows you to move outside of star lanes, which is really valuable. And then in the next tree, you have wormholes, which is also really, really valuable. So this tech is extremely good as well. Um, and then in the third ring, the only other tech that I feel strongly about is the one that gives me more curiosities over here. I usually only pick these up if I specifically need to colonize the cold planets, which is worth mentioning. The more barren and cold a planet is, the techs start over here, and then it moves to warmer over here. So we have like barren and toxic all the way on the far left, and we have ash and lava all the way on the far right. Um, just as like a little rule of thumb to be like, oh, I need to colonize an Arctic planet, and you don't have to look at every single one of these. You can be like, well, it's kind of a colder planet, and you can look over here and you say, oh, boom, there it is. Also, there's a search bar that I should have mentioned, but uh, it's not a great search bar. I wouldn't rely on it too much. um, so that's pretty much it for this one. I guess I should be mentioning the bonus text too. So let's go to the right real fast. These basic system developments are how you add starports to your systems, which allows you to move populations between systems. That's good. And it also allows you to turn luxury resources into system improvements, which give you tons of rewards. So it's very good. I usually try to make sure I get this third ring unlocked the second I think I have enough luxury resources to make a development. Because they're very powerful, especially if you can get them early on. And then the only other one I really care about in the science tree is this Hyperion engine. It gives you 4 movement points. I value movement speed a lot in this game personally, so the sooner I can get faster moving ships, the better. And I guess Ring 2 here also has a 3 movement one that doesn't cost strategic resources, so that one's really good as well. On the left side, the bonus ring text will give you extra laws and extra civilian ship movement. You're probably not going to have enough influence on most factions to make good use of extra laws early. So this one can be good, can be less than great. You got to take it on a game by game basis. And the civilian ships, these are primarily the ships that will carry food to outposts if you're a faction that relies on that mechanic, um, which can help make your outposts grow more quickly. Uh, I, I think it's pretty negligible. I usually don't care. I've never been like, I want to get faster ships, so for that exact reason. So it's all right. Um, these are the only access to food techs you have early. Uh, they are definitely worth getting. Just keep in mind what each individual one does and do some basic math to see what your greatest value is. And again, don't build them before you've built your foundation. You want to get your industry up and stuff. And then once you're starting to expand a lot, you're using a lot of food. Once you have uh, empty planets because you have a lot of colonization techs and you need to fill the planets out, then pick these techs up, then build the food. Um, if you have a system with two planets and they're both maxed out in population and you can't grow any more people, then getting the food is not really that important. If you're not expanding a bunch and using a bunch of food to grow those new systems, then the food's not really that important. This one is an excellent, good, military or not, you probably want to grab your first ship upgrades because you'll have to fight pirates. You'll have probably quests to do that involve, killing a couple ships here and there. So just picking this up doesn't mean you're going full out war against somebody else. Um, and it's good to be a little bit prepared. And that's basically it for this one. Uh, Yeah, the only other one I think is specifically worth mentioning is if you're expanding a lot, getting these little like approval flags with the thumbs down will allow you to have more systems before incurring happiness penalties. So that's nice. And then the north sector, feel pretty strongly about some of these early techs. You can do either of these first ones. This one on the right gives big data shipyards, which gives your ships more XP. Ships that have enough XP level up, which gives them more health. That's it, more health. But it's every little bit counts. And then this one over here has the chain gang program. Some factions have a really hard time creating manpower, so this can be nice. Um, just be careful with it. It does use a population unit, and it is turn-based, so you can only do it once every turn. But it's a good tech overall. Of course, going into the next tree, you get all these techs, which is just good stuff. Specifically, these are called command points, and they allow you to make bigger fleets. Bigger fleets pool their attack and defense power together. Bigger fleets is a good way to make your ships stronger without actually making the individual ships stronger. So I highly value anything that gives command points, which includes this tech as well. Um, and this tech is even spicier because it gives you tanks. Um, Ground battles can have infantry, armored tanks, or air units. And it's kind of like a rock, paper, scissors game, and tanks beat infantry. And early game, you will only have access to infantry or tanks. So usually everybody just has nothing but tanks. But if you're unfortunate and you have infantry and someone's attacking you with tanks, you're going to lose your ground battles really hard. So this is a very strong early military tech. The other one is this focused plasma for this titanium A2S slugs. It doesn't seem like much, but equipping ships with a bunch of these and sending a lot of them out will allow you to weaken a system without actually having to invade it. So rather than having a long, drawn out ground battle that takes like 10 turns and it's back and forth, you just plop your fleet on top of the system and you sit there until you deplete that system's manpower to 0. Then you do the ground battle and then you instantly win because they have nobody on the ground to really defend. And it goes very slowly without this module, that strategy. So if you're planning on doing that, you're gonna want to have an entire fleet dedicated to this module. And then after that, it gets a little bit more personal. What type of battle tactics do you want? What type of weapons do you want? I usually make those decisions based on what type of strategic resources I have in abundance. And then also, if I am in like an actual huge military conflict, what do I see my opponent going for? Military is, in this game, is a lot about adaptation. Seeing what they're doing and adapting to it. Do they have a bunch of laser weapons? Okay, let's focus on laser defense. Let's get tactics that hurt that. Let's stay at certain ranges that affect that? Do they have a bunch of missiles? Okay, well, slugs are good at shooting missiles down. I can potentially take 0 damage because I shoot all of their missiles down. And then if you do that, beware that the opponent will probably see that and be like, okay, missiles aren't working anymore. And then they'll switch to a new strategy. And then you get this awesome back and forth where you're constantly adapting to each other. And I think that's it. It's just a quick and dirty overview. I'm going to do another video where I do the first 30 turns as United Empire, and you can see me put into practice uh, what I've said here with the technology tree and how I take every turn and say, okay, well, what do I need now based on what I've done? I've been practicing with the United Empire doing the first 30 turns for like 10 games or so. And just about every single game, I've made different choices. The United Empire actually seems pretty flexible on what choices they make early in text, whereas other factions I've played are like, nah, you get these same 6 texts in a row no matter what. So that should make it pretty interesting um, and should show you some of the thought process behind actually picking some of these texts. And I think that's it. So, yeah, awesome. Hopefully, you guys learned something through my rambling.